Hi, everybody, and welcome to Seed Speaks. This is a video series brought to you by Seed World Group. My name is Mark Zinkowitz, and I am an editor with Seed World Group. And this month, we're talking with experts about soft skills that we all need to be successful in business. And today, we're talking with 4 experts about post-pandemic networking. Now that most of us are getting back to in-person events, we're asking the question, does modern networking require new skills? I'm joined today by Jordan McFarlen, speaker and tech incubator manager at Cultivator, based in Saskatchewan, Canada, Jennifer Crouse, senior director, meetings and services at the American Seed Trade Association. Hi, Jennifer.
Hi there, how are you?
Good to see you. I'm also joined by Thomas Lubberstedt, plant breeding researcher at Iowa State University. Thomas, I hope I pronounced your name right.
Oh, yes, it sounded quite correct. Hello,
Excellent.
everyone.
Welcome. And last but not least, I'm joined by Paul Scott, research geneticist with the USDA Agricultural Research Service. Welcome, Paul.
Thank you, Mark. It's a pleasure to be here.
Now, today we're talking, as I said, about skills needed to successfully network now that we've sort of turned the corner on the pandemic and many of us are getting back to in-person events. For some, in-person events actually began again last year in 2021. For others, like myself here in Canada, in-person meetings and conferences actually only began again pretty recently. Now, first, we're going to hear from Jordan. He couldn't be on live with us today. I interviewed Jordan the other day about some of the major skills that people need to network that they might have grown a bit rusty on during the pandemic when virtual events reigned supreme. Now, Jordan runs Canada's first credit union-led tech incubator called Cultivator with the goal of helping to grow successful Saskatchewan startups. He works with a variety of stakeholders, including industry, investors, government, and academia, but most importantly, local founders to remove the barriers to entrepreneurship. In the process, he's learned a thing or two about networking. So we're going to play my chat with him now. It's about 5 minutes long, and then we'll begin our live panel discussion. So hang on, everyone, while we hear from Jordan. Well, Jordan, thank you so much for joining me today.
Mark, thanks for having me. Super excited to be here.
Now, since people are getting back to in-person events after 2 years of a pandemic, are there any skills that you've noticed you may have grown rusty on during the past 2 years with regard to networking? And how are you sort of working to sort of get back into form, so to speak?
Yeah, I think some of the biggest things are just the little stuff. It's the small talk or the icebreaker or the openers. So I know for me, preparing for events now, and I've been fortunate to attend some in-person events both across Canada and into San Francisco as well. And it's the icebreakers. So how do you break the ice with an individual, approach an individual? I think that's a big one. But also, how do you exit a conversation if you're at a large conference or networking event and you see somebody else you'd be liking to talk to, and you need to end your conversation. I find in Zoom, it's a little bit easier to end, but when you're in person, I think it's just thinking about those muscles to both enter and exit a conversation are extremely important. So what are your intros and what are your exits or your thank yous and continues on? The other thing I think is just really as it relates to the events is really think about that preparation. And so when I go to an event, it's always about how am I thinking about who's on my hit list, who are the 5 to 10 key people that I want to connect with. So I go into a networking event, and while organic connections are great, I really want to guarantee a win. So if there's 5 or 6 people that I want to connect with, I want to make sure that I've targeted them. I know what they look like. I've checked out their LinkedIn, and I'm really focused on getting those. And so sometimes you can be more efficient, and it's not as much about the time you've spent, but really about making the right connections. So as opposed to needing 3 hours to network, you might only need 45 minutes if you make the right connection. So those are just a few of the tips or focus areas for me as I reapproach those.
Yeah, I guess there's a lot of things to think about when you're in person, because you can't hit the mute button or turn off your webcam when you're face to face with someone, right?
Very true. Yeah, very true.
How has networking changed now compared to before the pandemic hit? For you, what are the major changes?
I think, a couple of the things are just the hybrid approach now. It's both the virtual and in-person component. So I think it's the relationship building piece that's still really important, which is what's the memorable connection that you have with somebody. So what do you do to make yourself memorable with the individuals that you interact with and build that relationship? So I think what's changed is that the window of opportunity is so much smaller now. So if you have less in-person interactions or opportunities or events, the importance of those goes up significantly. So maybe previously, if there were 5 or 6 events that you might run into an individual at, maybe post-pandemic, that's 1 or 2, and people are, joining virtually or whatever that looks like. So I think really being strategic. So you need to be a little bit more strategic and targeted, and really, consider the return on investment and the ROI from attending something. And then second is, things that were important before, but are even more important now, is just how do you get that to the action point of obtaining a connection on LinkedIn or an email address or a number, whatever that looks like, to keep the connection for you going. And so I think that's really key, is the follow-up. What does the follow-up look like? It's easier now to hop on a Zoom with somebody or hop on a call. So how do you use those in-person connections to then further build that relationship as a follow-up? So I'd say those are a couple of things to consider now, as we're a bit post-pandemic with networking.
Now, of course, summer's coming, a lot of big meetings coming up. How can organizations plan their meetings now with a lot of these things in mind?
I think the biggest thing is really making sure when you're bringing people together in person that you're optimizing the value and making it an engaging, and trying to do things you can't do, when you're not in person. So for us, when we've brought together, our Ag Tech Accelerator program, we brought together a cohort of companies from across Canada, as well as into the UK, and mentors and investors from across North America. And we wanted to make sure is that we had some very targeted meetings set up and some targeted components, but that we also had free time where we did a curling bond spiel, or we had an opportunity event where it wasn't a structured agenda. There was just time to talk. I think the biggest things is, humans love to connect and they love to talk. So sometime as an event organizer or meeting organizer, it's how can you get out of the way and just let good people that you bring together, come up with great ideas and connect. So we kind of believe if you bring good people together, good things happen. And so I think it's not over engineering experience. It's curating just the right amount, and doing some of the things you can't do. You can't go curling, or you can't go lawn bowling, or you can't, walk outside in nature with the group via Zoom. So that's great. And you also can't have side conversations or other connections. So just putting people in the same room oftentimes is a big win alone. So just finding that right balance between curation and flexibility.
Great tips. Thanks so much, Jordan, for setting the stage for us today.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. I hope the session goes really well, and really appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you so much to Jordan for his time. Now, Jordan touched on some important points there in regard to networking skills and how things might have changed in that regard over the last 2 years. Now, Jennifer, Thomas, and Paul, I invited you all to be on today because you're all currently planning some big meetings for later this year. Jennifer, you're helping plan the American Seed Trade Association's new leadership summit taking place June 25th to 29th in Indianapolis. Thomas and Paul, you're both co-chairs of the planning committee for the National Association of Plant Breeders annual meeting, which takes place in Ames, Iowa from August 8th to 11th. Now let's go around the table quick. Jennifer, this Asta meeting is being branded as the New Leadership Summit. What's new about it, and how was the importance of networking opportunities and inspiration for that?
Well, the Asta Leadership Summit is basically, it's kind of like our answer to the pandemic for American Seed Trade Association membership in two ways. First, our members are just being faced with so much disruption because of the pandemic, beginning with the COVID shutdowns, then moving on to supply chain issues, and now there's global market volatility. Meanwhile, there's internal shifts too with technology transformation. And then there's the ever looming political forecast and how that might impact their businesses. So our conference, the Leadership Summit, has been newly created kind of with a future focus with all those things in mind to really help prepare our member companies to develop the leaders at their own businesses and also for the entire seed industry to be able to navigate and tackle those challenges with the support of their national association. So our event is, as I said, very future focused. There's also a lot more professional and expert speakers on the agenda. We've got a central US location, and we've made the program very efficient to minimize their time away from the office. But in terms of networking, I really appreciate and agree with the points that Jordan was making. We've incorporated a lot of these personal interactions into the event design so that we can maximize and even more highly prioritize those interpersonal interactions that are so important that we had to live without during those pandemic years. So we've built them into almost every experience that they will have at this Leadership Summit, in addition to more networking receptions and even interaction within the receptions for facilitated things that we can build in for people that might be a little shy about getting back out there.
Now, Thomas, you mentioned to me the other day that when you were planning the upcoming NAPB meeting that you'd considered doing a hybrid event, which is like a live event with a virtual option added, but that your members overwhelmingly wanted an in-person event. So this will be NAPB's first exclusively live event since 2019. And during the pandemic, I mean, we all know there was so much talk about, the death of the live in-person event, that virtual events would be, the way of the future. But according to NAPB members, at least, that hasn't happened. The live event, in-person event is coming back in a big way. What did you hear from your members, and why do you think they're so eager to get to an in-person gathering like this?
Yeah, so there's a survey after each of these NAPB meetings, and maybe stepping back a bit, in 2019 was the last in-person meeting in Georgia with more than 400 participants. The membership of NAPB is roughly 500. And then the online meetings in Nebraska and Cornell 2020 and 21, we saw slightly declining participation. Last year it was close to 300 participants. So it went down from 400 to 300. And the survey was then really giving a clear vote for having an in-person meeting again, if possible, from the COVID situation. And the survey didn't really dig into the motivation. So this is a little bit my interpretation here. But I think a strong point of NAPB meetings is that there's usually a pre or post-conference tour of companies in the areas, breeding companies typically, which is of big interest and which is really hard to replace by any online videos or similar, even though Cornell did a nice job to have videos for their breeding programs, but I think it's not really allowing to see and experience plants and breeding programs in the field. The other point is really the networking, so the interpersonal interactions. And my take is that Zoom and similar meetings allow nicely focused meetings where you have a defined time and agenda, a defined set of persons participating. So it's very good in problem solving. You can save costs in traveling, etc. But the unexpected parts of meetings where you make experiences that you didn't really know about or expected, that you meet persons you haven't talked to before, I think that is really missing, that meeting new members of the community, getting ideas that were outside your expectations perhaps. And for me personally, that is kind of the value of meetings, that often I come back with something that I hadn't planned, but that was really important for my future activities in terms of new contacts, new ideas. And that's, I think, really hard to replace by Zoom meetings.
Exactly. Yeah. And life itself does not take place over Zoom. And so there's so many advantages to being in person with people. Now, Paul, you had an idea for the upcoming NAPB meeting to add to the agenda what you call a Future of Plant Breeding Community session to help encourage people to network. Now, why did you do this, and how will this session encourage them to do that?
That's a great question, Mark. The community session is being organized by Dr. Carolyn Lawrence Dill of Iowa State University and I. And our goal really is to give the attendees of the meeting first an additional chance to network and interact and discuss what they gained from the meeting. And the idea is that everybody will go into breakout groups and have discussions about questions like what can the community do together more efficiently? What resources does the community need? And then the cool thing about this is after the breakout groups, we're going to have reports from each of the breakout groups, and we'll compile those reports into a white paper that will make available to it'll be publicly available to anybody who wants it. And the nice thing about that is it gives the meeting, the National Association of Plant Breeders, a nice deliverable to report on as the outcome of the meeting. And also the USDA NEFA, who is funding the meeting, are very interested in what the contents of this white paper is. So yeah, our plan is to build on, there's a roadmap for plant breeding that was developed by the USDA Office of the Chief Scientist. And we're going to take that as a starting point for our discussion and then build on that and try to be sure that we're on target with meeting the objectives of that roadmap and capture any ideas that have come out of this meeting that might help us get to the milestones of the roadmap more efficiently or quickly.
Wow, you guys have a lot on your plates, obviously, planning these meetings. And I mean, to be in charge of these events, I mean, I can't imagine everything that's involved in doing that. Before we sign off for the day, I'm just curious about some challenges that you've each faced in doing so. Right? I mean, you spent, so many months doing things virtually during the pandemic, and then things kind of shifted to a hybrid model for a while, and now we're back to doing things live and in person again. Jennifer, let's start with you. What important lessons have you learned about networking and what you might maybe call like a post-pandemic world?
Well, I would agree with a lot of the things that have been said here. During the pandemic, we started with entirely virtual events. Then last year, we migrated to hybrid. I would say one of the biggest challenges is just knowing what the current status of your audience is, because it's ever evolving and it's so impacted by what's going on in the news. And we actually intended for our leadership summit this June to be a hybrid virtual again, to be as accommodating as possible to every type of member and their individual needs. We found that we have not had any virtual registrants this year. So we're glad to see it, because it means that our audience will be 100% in person and able to take up these interactive activities. And we've built in some similar events to what was being described here, with those small working groups and talking about downloading what you've learned and creating a cohort of people you haven't met before to help you follow up going forward. So that's been one of the biggest challenges, but there's also some opportunities too. People have become more comfortable with technology because they've had to be. So we can take little tools and tricks for engagement, like live audience polling, and people are more comfortable taking out their phone and engaging in social media. And we can incorporate those things into the conference to enhance the networking and interaction using some of the pandemic tools that accidentally got picked up along the way.
And Thomas, what about you? What's the major lesson you've learned for how to effectively network after riding this roller coaster we've been on since early 2020?
Yeah, I think it's really trying to embrace the opportunity to interact with persons in person again, and maybe be more patient with uncertainties that are still out there, both in terms of COVID. Of course, we still don't really know where it's going, but it seems to be increasingly under control. But then also being patient with maybe some of the things that are more difficult to obtain. Supply chain shortages is one topic, and that is hitting in some instances. And so we need to, in some cases, come up with some alternative solutions. So trying to find a path despite of all these uncertainties.
And Paul, how about you? I'll give you the final word before we take a couple of audience questions and sign off for the day. What's your number one piece of advice for people when getting back out into the world and going to live meetings this year?
Well, I think it's really important to remember that not everybody experiences live meeting in the same way. So some people are very energized in a group and, take energy away from interactions with other people. And on the other hand, other people are, it takes a lot of energy for them. They have to give energy in order to interact effectively in a group, and it's an exhausting process for them. So as you're attending these in-person meetings, it's important to keep in mind that not everybody is having the same experience that you're having. And it's just important to, give people space when they need it, and think about how others might be experiencing the meeting differently than you are.
Now, again, we have a couple audience questions, as I mentioned. So before we sign off, I'm just going to throw these out there to you guys. I'll just open up the floor. Do you have any recommendations on getting conversations started with people you don't know? How do you form a good connection? I'm going to throw that out to you guys. What do you think about that? How can you get a conversation started? You're in a room, people are talking, and there's somebody there that you don't know. You want to strike up a conversation with them. How do you generally do that?
Yeah, I think introducing yourself is the way to start. And if you're aware, after that, seek common ground. So if you don't know anything about the person, then hopefully there will be something in your introduction that displays some common ground that you'll be able to interact on.
Yeah, that's great. That always works for me, is mentioning where I'm from, where I come from, because it's a pretty small world, and usually it doesn't really matter where you're from. People usually have some kind of connection to that, whether it's the country you're from, or the specific state, or the province, or what have you, right?
I feel that the NAPB meeting in particular, with those tours where you're walking next to persons to visit research or companies and walk through the breeding programs, I think that really gives an opportunity to just meet new persons, and having the active research next to you is a good starter, I think.
Yeah, exactly. And that's one of the benefits of being in the in-person meeting, right? Is you're there, you're seeing the same things. You're not in your, with Zoom, everybody's at home or everybody's in their own little silo seeing something different out the window. But if everybody's seeing the same thing out the window, or if you all went on the same tour of the same facility, then you've got something that you can talk about to sort of help you relate to one another, right? Is there anything we can take that we learned from digital networking over the last couple of years that we can use in this post-pandemic networking world? That's an interesting one. After doing things virtually for so many months, was there a certain skill that maybe you learned over Zoom that maybe you could apply to an in-person conversation? I've never really thought about that before. I suppose for me personally, I guess something I've learned over Zoom is maybe to how to get is maybe how to get to the point, right? And to sort of make my point and make it clear and concise, because with Zoom, you don't really engage in a random conversation. Things are maybe a little bit more targeted. We're going to talk about this, and this. Everything is very regimented and specific. And so I suppose for me personally, that's something I could take to an in-person event, is to maybe, if I say something, maybe be a little bit more direct, or maybe get to the point a little bit quicker. I suppose maybe that could aid me in certain situations. What do you guys think? Is there something that you picked up in the virtual world over the last couple of years that you might take to an in-person event?
Yeah, I think during a lot of virtual sessions, the challenge is to keep people's attention, and you're competing usually with their second screen or something else that's going on. So little tools you can build in periodically during the course of a session that you're in, particularly live polling or trivia questions, or moments where the audience has to respond back to you to keep their attention. You're still struggling to keep their attention even in an in-person session. So those are some of the things that I got in the habit of doing during virtual events that we're now incorporating into the in-person events.
Yeah, that's true. Like you say, with an in-person event, it can actually maybe be more challenging to keep people's attention, because we often think of there being a lot of distractions when people are working from home, but I suppose at a live event there's even more distractions. I mean, there's all kinds of things going on, and there's people around you, different conversations and things. So yeah, that's a good point, Jennifer. Thomas, Paul, anything you guys have learned over the last couple of years?
There's one technology that is going to be retained, I think, from online meetings. The poster sessions will be organized and supported by SQL, actually. And so we will have videos from the speakers, including introductions of themselves and poster presentations. And I think that is a nice technology to be able to see it at any time convenient, rather than hoping that the presenter of the poster is around when you're walking by. So I think that we want to retain it for our in-person meeting, and it could be a technology that will be around for a longer time.
Exactly, that's a good point. It's an on-demand world, right? So that will definitely come in handy. Paul, I'll give you the last word before we sign off.
Thanks, Mark. Yeah, I think that really there's a lot of value in having the society be more familiar with how to do, online types of meetings. That having everybody educated in that way allows us to do things at in-person meetings that help us to engage people who can't attend the meeting. So things like, if people are international attendees or people with disabilities can attend an online component of the meeting. That's tremendously valuable. And so now that we are aware that these online tools can be used to complement our in-person meetings, I think it'll be a better experience for everyone.
Yeah, exactly. No need to throw the baby out with the bathwater, right? I mean, even it might be a live in-person event, but we can still use these digital tools to help enhance it. So, no, great points, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me. That's all the time we have today. Thank you again, Jennifer, Paul, Thomas, and Jordan as well for your time today. For information on the Asta Leadership Summit, visit betterseed.org. For information on the NAPB annual meeting, visit plantbreeding.org and click the Meetings and Events tab. Join us next week when we'll discuss the topic of crisis communication with host Alex Martin. Thanks again, Jennifer, Paul, and Thomas, for your time today.